today's edition, which will feature Their Eyes Were Watching God as the novel that we'll be talking about. And remember that the books that shaped America were not always the best books, but they were ones that started conversations, as this book did, as To Kill a Mockingbird did, as Goodnight Moon keeps doing. Because we will be talking about Goodnight Moon in this series this semester as well. So to introduce today, we have Professor Daniel Whiteman, Assistant Professor of Foreign Policy at the Washington Semester Program, which is in our School of Special and Extended Studies. He has had a career in foreign policy, received his PhD from Brown University in French Studies, and then was a Senior Foreign Service Officer at the Department of State from 1985 to 2009. Began his career here at AU in 2009. His publications include an account of his 2 years as spokesman at the U.S. Embassy in Port-au-Prince from 1999 to 2001, and that's entitled A Haiti Chronicle, The Undoing of a Latent Democracy, published in 2004. He has published articles on Africa contemporary literature and the oral tradition, notably in his book Kadara, published in 1987. His travel articles have appeared in a number of publications, including the New York Times and the International Herald Tribune. And with that, you have the floor, sir.
When I signed up for this, I didn't realize what I was doing. I just said, I love this book. That was what the question was. Which book do you love? Well, I love this one. Little did I know that this was going to turn into, preparation and rereading the book and looking at some critical comments. This is a great book, 1937, and I'm assuming that some or all have sort of read it at some point. We've all read this, but I just go through what happens in the book. It's a pretty simple structure, and both in the plot and in the question of who is the narrator. It's a little bit ambiguous, but these are things that can be figured out. And the reason I'm just thinking of this right now, this book shaped America, I guess, because in 1937, an African-American woman had a lot to overcome in order to be even in view of others, to even be part of this society. The structure was pretty rigid. It was white men, white women, black men, black women, and the African-American women at that time. I mean, it almost seems trite, this book at this time, because so much has happened since 1937. But in rereading it, I had to remember, well, let's go back and remember how it was at that time, because the things that Janie, the heroine, the main character, the things that she overcomes today seem very simple and like no-brainers. She stood up to an to an uninteresting husband who was sort of domineering, to two of them actually, and searched for love and never found it until the last couple of years of her life, of the story, that is. And these things seem like, why wouldn't she? But we have to keep remembering that at that time in 1937, this was remarkable. And I guess if that notion becomes sort of easy in today's America, it's partly thanks to her and this book. Let me just review the plot, because you've read it, but maybe it was a few years ago. So Hurston was in fact born in a place called Eatonville, Florida, which was established in 1866 as a black town. This was a real place. And it is also the place where much of the story, where the narration of the story takes place. It's near Orlando, around the middle and eastern part of Florida. I didn't know until preparing this that there were such things as black towns, and it was officially that. So there's a lot of autobiographical material here. There isn't much that's actually concealed or recreated for the sake of fiction. There's a lot of this. The names are changed. The story is pretty much the autobiography of the author in many ways, not entirely. Hurston came from a broken home. Her mother died when she was young. Her mother had said to her this phrase that that rings very eloquently in the book. Jump at the sun. I'm going to try to do African American dialect, and this will be mostly comic relief because I'm pretty lame at that. But the book is written largely in dialect, and it's the only way you can really, and the only way to honor this book, by the way, properly, is to read it aloud. And I want to spend about 2/3 of the time doing that because it's just beautiful. When you hear me trying to imitate an African American in 1937, try to look past how lame I am and to what is being said. The dialogue itself, which is part of the richness of the book, was greatly criticized by not Langston Hughes. I mean, she had a falling out with Langston Hughes over the authorship of a play. Did she write it? Did he write it? There were very bad feelings between her and some of the Harlem Renaissance people, but it was, I think it was Richard Wright, 20 or 30 years later, who said, "This is trash. This is a stereotype. This only fulfills the stereotypes that white people have of black people being folkloric and simple and uneducated and inarticulate." So there was a huge backlash among black American writers in the 50s and 60s against this book. But then Alice Walker came and rescued it in 1975. She brought it back very happily. She also spent a year or two trying to find Hurston's grave. I mean, this was how much Alice Walker was affected by. So there's been a lot of back and forth in the historic reaction to this book. But for Alice Walker, we would not even be aware of the book. She really dug it out of obscurity. Hurston was in D.C. in 1918. She was at Howard. She named the student newspaper, which was called The Hilltop. If you've been to Howard, you know that's a great name for a student newspaper. It is on the Hilltop. I don't know if she was the editor-in-chief, but we think she would have been about 18 years old, maybe at that time. Maybe she was born in 1900, 1901. Maybe in the 1890s. We're not quite sure. But she was an undergraduate at Howard, and where she was a waitress and a manicurist. This is someone who never had money, ever. She never benefited from this book financially enough for it to make a difference. She was noticed at Barnard. After Howard, she went to Barnard, where the great anthropologist Franz Boas noticed her and said, "You are remarkable. Let me arrange something." He worked out a 4-year sort of a 4-year grant for her to do work in anthropology. So she was an anthropologist as well as a fiction writer. And again, but for Franz Boas and but for Alice Walker, we would never have known this author, I think. During those 4 years, by the way, she went to Haiti. And she wrote this book in something like 6 weeks. It must have been a moment of fevered inspiration. You know, Handel wrote Messiah in something like 2 weeks. Some of these things are just amazing. The creative person sometimes works in bursts. We call that Dionysian. And sometimes they just steadily go along. What's the other one? If it's not Dionysian, it's Apollonian. Apollonian. She was definitely Dionysian. What's the difference? Dionysus was the god of wine and insobriety and inspiration. Apollo was the god of reasoning. And in this school, in the School of International Studies next door, this is a big deal in analyzing cultures. We think of some as Apollonian. That would be Bernard Skinner, the psychologist, putting a baby in a box and seeing time after time, inductive reasoning. What's that?
Skinner put his daughter in the box.
His daughter, and others, yes.
Later others, yeah.
He's sometimes cited as the Apollonian. Einstein being, E equals MC. Sorry. Skinner would be the Apollonian. Einstein would be the Dionysian. The moment, that incredible moment of creativity which most of us have never had, which Zora Neale Hurston did have during the 6 weeks in Haiti when she wrote this book. Now the book, the structure you probably remember. It's really very simple. It starts out at the end. The whole thing is a recapitulation. It's the first person telling her story to her best friend, Phoebe Watson. Phoebe, Pheobe. The spelling is a little bit liberal, but because of this friendship with her neighbor in Eatonville and all the things she's been through, the only person she's comfortable really talking with is her friend Phoebe. So the very beginning, and later I'd like to just sort of read this because it does it so much better than any commentary could. It starts out with, we're in medias res, right? We're in the middle of a tale. She's been through these adventures. She's been through her third and final marriage, and she's back in Eatonville telling her friend Phoebe what happened. And this, actually, let's jump to the very, no, I want to do this kind of systematically. This conversation takes place on the back porch of Phoebe, and we have people coming in and out. This is trite, but I think of them as Greek chorus. The back porchers, the people who gather, who listen, who react, who think, well, she did the wrong thing. They're judgmental. There are two Greek choruses in the book. One is the back porchers, who are people just hanging around listening to the story. The privileged, real story goes only to Phoebe. But the back porchers, they listen in, they react, they think, well, you were stupid to do this and that and what. And then the muckers, later in the story, when with her final husband, Tea Cake, she goes to the Everglades as seasonal labor. And these guys are filthy with mud and muck, harvesting products in the Everglades, waist deep in mud. These are the muckers. And that's kind of a Greek chorus also, because these are, they come and go, they have sort of a group reaction to their own circumstances and the circumstances of the couple. And so that's a little touch. The things to keep in mind structurally, there's nothing complicated here. There are a couple of Greek choruses. There's a narration that starts at the end and then goes back to the beginning and comes back. That's not all that unusual in fiction. There aren't that many images that recur, but this will remind you, if you've read this, the horizon. The very first line, which is, once you read the first line of this book, you're hooked. Let's do it right now. It's all about the horizon. I remember 20 years ago when I first read this, just stunned by the power of this first thing. Ships at a distance have every man's wish on board, every man. For some, they come in with the tide. For others, they sail forever on the horizon, never out of sight, never landing until the watcher, capital W, the watcher, turns his eyes away in resignation, his dreamed mocked to death by time. That is the life of men. That's the first paragraph. Wow! You have to kind of read that 5 or 6 times before. Who's the watcher? What's the horizon? Is the horizon her version of freedom? Yes, it is. But it's also the image of endless challenge where you can never reach your destination. And when I read the line that way, I think, she wrote this in Haiti, where the best-known proverb is Deye mon gan mon. Behind every mountain, there's another mountain. This had to be in her consciousness if she lived in Haiti. The notion that Haiti is a mountainous country, and the sense of futility. When you climb a mountain, you think no, there's another mountain. Nope, there's another mountain. Read Bill Bryson on this topic, A Walk in the Woods. Have you read Bill? Fantastic. But the sense that you're never finished, you're never getting where you're going, and so the horizon has this double meaning. Again, it's not complicated, but it's a very pregnant image that's used both ways. Let me reread it now that after this. Ships at a distance have every man's wish on board. For some, they come in with the tide. For others, they sail forever to the horizon, never out of sight, never landing, until the watcher turns his eyes away in resignation, his dreams mocked to death by time. That is the life of men. Who is the watcher? That's not God. That's the person reading the book. That's you and me. The person who's just has some chance for having some freedom, and by the way, true love, which is the other thing that the author strives for. Freedom and love. That's not real complicated. But the person experiencing the telling of this tale, that would be the listener, I think. That's the watcher. It comes clear 100 pages later when she first uses the phrase, their eyes were watching God. This would be the muckers. These would be the people laboring in the fields. Their eyes were watching God. They were waiting for the hurricane, if you remember the hurricane in the final adventure of the book. And these are day laborers looking up, thinking, is there a hurricane coming? Is there not a hurricane coming? It's a real bad hurricane. A lot of people get killed. And their eyes were watching God refers 100 pages later to those day laborers. So, and I think the day laborers, the muckers, are a Greek chorus. They're also us. They are the observers. Anybody observing an ambiguous, challenging life situation, I think. The other image that keeps coming up is the budding tree, the tree in bloom. This is really sexy. I mean, this is really erotic. When she looks at the pear tree and she sees the bees and there's stuff oozing out of the leaves. I mean, this is steamy stuff, and it comes back quite a few times. The tree, which almost always is the image of fertility and sexual awakening, but occasionally has a dark side. So every image works both ways. Let's see, and actually that's it. Oh, and the long hair. One of your wonderful photo here. I don't know if this is a portrait of Hurston. I don't know, but the Janie described in the book. We never see her, of course, but we know that there's something about her long hair, which is very seductive. And more than one husband says, "Hide that hair. It's too seductive. Men will become interested." The first person is a very attractive young woman, and the obligation to hide the hair under a piece of cloth is a recurring image also. The hair is is what belongs to her, which is temporarily removed by tyrannical husbands. Don't show your hair. And then at the very end, when she has true love and freedom, the hair comes out. So I don't know where this illustration comes from, but that's sort of the person I think of, very beautiful, and dreamy, and thinking about the horizon and freedom. This is a beautiful picture. I don't know where it comes from, but it's a great, appropriate selection. So the plot, that's pretty easy. She's got 4 loves. There are 4 episodes in the book, just 4. The first one is her grandmother, born into slavery, referred to as Nanny. She has a name, but she's referred to as Nanny. And she was born into slavery. Her great love was her adopted daughter, because the mother has disappeared, just as Hurston's mother disappeared, autobiographical. And the grandmother really loves the granddaughter, but wants to confine her to assure her lifelong security, wants her to be safe. True love, freedom, exploration, no, this is out. So there's a conflict at the very beginning, but this is love. This is a grandmother's love, protective love for her granddaughter, who has everything, all the cards against her. She's a black woman in the early 20th century. She has no mother. I mean, what more could be thrown at her as challenges from life? So the grandmother's love comes out as wish to protect her. And she hooks her up with a boring man named Logan Killen. Logan Killen is an older man. He's got 60 acres or something. He has a potato farm. This is the best that Nanny can imagine for her granddaughter. A man who's way older than Janie, and really boring and really nothing much going for him, but he owns a potato farm. And the grandmother kind of forces Janie into this marriage. Janie goes, oh, okay. You know. She goes into it feeling like she's not a woman. And then later, when she understands that there's no real love here, then she realizes, oh, I'm a woman now. I know what's missing in my life. And then her transition from childhood to womanhood seems to happen during her, not violent, but very boring marriage with Logan Killix. Now, how she leaves Logan to go to Joe Stark's, I'm not clear on whether she actually ever divorces Killix or kills him, or whether she's a bigamist. I don't know. But she leaves Logan Killix to go marry a man who's more alluring. His name is Joe Starks. He's sometimes called Jody in the book. And he's an ambitious, charismatic man who goes and fictionally creates Eastonville, Florida, which is just a settlement in the fiction. It's just a settlement. It's not really incorporated. He makes some passionate, charismatic speeches to a sort of a Greek chorus type of group. And we should make something out of this town. He writes to Sears and Roebuck to get a single street lamp, which the street lamp makes the town more than just a settlement. And then everybody says, Joe Starks, you're great. We now we need a mayor. And by acclaim, he becomes the mayor of the town. And pretty attractive guy. Problem is, he keeps Janie under his thumb. And he's a very eloquent speaker. When she stands up to speak, she shuts him up and says in front of everybody, a woman's place is in the home. And she really, really doesn't like that. So again, just going over the skeleton of the plot line, she endures a 20-year marriage with Joe. He's a dynamic, well-intentioned guy. He's a traditionalist. Women don't open, wives just keep quiet and they run the shop. He's got a shop and it's very popular, and the back porchers are in the shop all the time, and a lot goes on in there. And it looks pretty good, but this is not true love. So the story has to go on. This is like kind of a medieval romance, right? Step 1, step 2, step 3. It's really like a medieval folktale. Step 3, in the shop. A man comes in lost. He's looking for a baseball game. He's in the wrong town. And that is Tea Cake, who also has a name. But in the book, he's now this is the real guy. This is the real love in Janie's life. She, with great fanfare, when Joe, her husband, when his kidneys fail and he dies of kidney failure, she gives him a splendid funeral and the whole town comes in. And by the way, she really tells him off on his deathbed. She says, "You don't love me. You haven't allowed me to be a woman." And you know, the poor guy, he's dying. And you could say, maybe this is not the right time to tell a dying man, for his wife to tell him that he was a rotten husband. But she does, and this is her liberation. And by the way, by that time, she's met Tea Cake, who was lost in the store looking for a ball game in the wrong town. And this guy is the real charmer. He is 12 years her junior, which is a big, important thing. And this, too, is autobiographical. Hurston had a man or a husband or, I guess, a lover maybe, 12 years younger, and her friends criticized her just as the back porchers criticized Janie for being duped. They say that he's after your money. because she has $200, which is a lot of money. And they are afraid that she has been sort of carried away by the emotion of this flatterer. They see him as a flatterer, and they say, watch out, he's going to get your money. But it turns out this is true love. And there's a very amusing scene where they've gone off on a train, they've gotten married, this time legitimately, because Joe is dead. The previous husband is dead. So now there's a true marriage, but the tone of everything is different. The marriage is not a big deal. And later, at the very sad end, when Tea Cake dies, the funeral is very low-key, unlike the funeral of Joe. Everything is more genuine. It's more truly felt. And so the truth, true love, freedom, the affirmation of the self of the woman, as in a medieval romance, it goes through one impasse and then another false start, and then the third time, it works. It's great. Unfortunately, the guy dies. We'll get to that. Now, the whole book is a flashback because it starts with Janie talking to Phoebe and defending herself, because at the time of the beginning of the novel, we're at the end of the story, and the townspeople have seen Janie has returned to Eatonville, the husband has died, Tea Cake has died, and everybody's convinced she's been had, she's been duped. In fact, not. And she's telling Phoebe, her best and only real friend, what really did happen. It's true that Tea Cake, one morning, shortly after they were married, she had $200 hidden, sewn into her shirt. And she got up in the morning. He was gone. He was out working in the muck. And she was groping around. She saw, oh my God, the $200 are missing. They're right. Does this come back in your memory? I mean, it's a hilarious scene. And she sees that he has found the $200 that she had hidden. This was her escape money that she would use to get back home if she needed to. Sorry, they're in Jacksonville at this point. To get back to Eatonville. And this is how she would get back if the rumor mongers are correct, and if Tea Cake is out to get her, this is her protection money. He's found it, he's taken it, and that is true. And she figures she'll never see him again. He comes back later that afternoon. He says, you know, I saw the money, I couldn't resist. I went gambling and I made more money for us. And I would never have left you. You know, it's a lovely scene of proving that this is the real deal. This guy really loves Janie. He couldn't resist. Man who's never seen $200, and he couldn't resist taking it. But he never meant to take it for himself. His purpose in taking it was to buy some drinks for his friends, to go gambling. He was a very good gambler, and to multiply the money for the marriage property, which he successfully does. Being stabbed in the back on the way, because when you're winning at poker, the losers want you to stay in the game, right? So when he gets up to leave with his earnings, they say, you can't leave now, you've got our money. He says, I am leaving. And they stab him in the back. It's okay. He gets back to the hotel. Janie patches him up. He's a very sturdy guy. And he's one of these lighthearted people. He goes around with a guitar. He sings. He's an artist. He's Dionysian. So that's a really wonderful scene. And then, just to review what happens, they go off to, his name is Virgil Woods. Virgil Woods. These are very colorful names, but they call him Tea Cake. The only unconditional love that Janie ever has. Not the grandmother, not Logan, not Joe or Jody, but Tea Cake. It's the one and only. Again, the story is very simple. And yet, oh my gosh, the power of the writing, and we'll get to that. And as you remember, if you read the book, during the hurricane, a lot of people are killed. The smart people get out in time. but those who believe that they can make it out alive have to endure this huge flood, and it's a bit crazy, but there's a cow swimming over its head in a flood, and Tea Cake says, grab the tail, which saves her life. She grabs the tail of a cow, but so does a rabid dog. And the rabid dog bites Tea Cake, and weeks later, we understand that he has hydrophobia, a horrible disease, rabies, and he dies of it. And she keeps going, she's very concerned. She goes to the doctor. Is there anything you can do? The doctor does everything he can. It's too late. He dies of hydrophobia. Horrible. And I mean, the image of hanging on to the tail of a cow in a flood to survive a hurricane, it's a little bit wild. But anyway, the dog doesn't bite her, but it does get Tea Cake. And despite the greatest efforts of the doctor, he can't be saved. As you know, hydrophobia creates panic and irrational behavior. And Tea Cake takes a gun. She has emptied most of the bullets in the gun, but not all. He takes a gun and tries to shoot her because he suspects her of having been fooling around with the doctor. And she talks him down, she begs, she pleads, and she reasons with him. She has not been fooling around with the doctor. She's mortified of what's happened to Tea Cake. Anyway, he starts firing. And he hits a couple empty chambers, and in self-defense, she kills him with a rifle. At the trial, it's determined this was no-brainer, this was self-defense. And then she goes back to Eatonville, where we get back to the beginning, and she's telling all of this to Phoebe. What an adventure. This is a little bit unlikely, the last part, but this is, thrilling adventure. Again, suspend disbelief. And try to remember, I wouldn't know what things were like. I will never know what things were like from the point of view of an African-American woman in 1937. I can't imagine. The adventures, there they are. They're thrilling, even though they're unlikely. And the systematic raising of herself, both in terms of true love, economic power, which never comes, and freedom. The horizon being that place where you want to go to. This was so deep to her, and I would not get it but for the incredible prose in this book. Let's read some of it. I won't embarrass you. I'll do it. I gave you the first paragraph, and then she talks about men in the first paragraph. And then here's if you got the book, it's page 1, or first page of the thing. Then she talks about women. Now, women forget all those things that they don't want to remember, and remember everything they don't want to forget. The dream is the truth. Then they act and do things accordingly. So, the beginning of this was a woman, and she had come back from burying the dead. That's Tea Cake. Well, and also Joe. Not the dead of sick and ailing with friends at the pillow and at the feet. She had come back from the sodden and bloated, the sudden dead, their eyes flung wide open in judgment. I've got goosebumps, do you? It's just, wow. That's the beginning. I remember reading this thinking, I'm not putting this down, and I didn't. I read it in about 2 or 3.
Where were you when you read it?
Actually, I was in South Africa. Funny you should mention. And I'm just noticing that the introduction is written by Edwidge Danticat of this edition, the Haitian fiction writer, because there's definitely a Haitian element in this. She wrote this in Haiti. Interesting. I have too many of these for us to. I'll choose a few just because I think the best way of honoring a book is to read it aloud. I really do think that. She's just getting into the narration. She's talking to Phoebe, but the narrator and there are questions, who is the narrator? Because sometimes the narrator is truly the third person and speaks in conventional English. Sometimes the narrator is Phoebe speaking in her version of English, which is sort of a dialect. And sometimes, then this gets really intriguing and maybe sloppy, I don't know. Sometimes it's the third person speaking with moments of dialect. What the hell is that? I mean, it's you could say this is she was sloppy, or you could say, let's do a PhD thesis on this. Who is the narrator? I mean, in some instances, you can't tell. It was written in such haste that I think in some cases she must have written the narration kind of between the third person and Phoebe, sort of halfway between. And if that's what she did or meant to do, that's fine by me. It's not a conventional fictional technique, but it's something else. Still in the third person. Seeing the woman as she was made them remember the envy they had stored up from the other times. These are the back porchers. This is the Greek chorus, envy. So they chewed up the back parts of their minds and swallowed with relish. They made burning statements with questions, skepticism. She was under judgment. And killing tools out of laughs. It was mass cruelty. A mood came alive. Words walking without masters, walking all together like harmony in a song. Again, Greek chorus. This is the neighbors. Gee whiz, you're a beautiful woman. You wasted your life on 3 worthless men. You've been had. There's rumors and gossip. It's not really malicious, but it's something she has to deal with, and can only deal with this in her talks with Phoebe. When she got to where she turned her face on the bander log and spoke, they scrambled a noisy "Good evening," and left their mouths setting open with their ears full of hope. Her speech was pleasant enough, but she kept walking straight onto her gate. The porch couldn't talk for looking. Okay, the accusing eyes looking at her. But nobody moved, nobody spoke, nobody even thought to swallow spit until after the gate slammed behind her. This is great fiction. I mean, this is great rhetoric or writing. It's so vivid. And again, I think Hurston really wanted to be a playwright and did direct and write some plays, but then Langston Hughes claimed that he wrote them. So they had this falling out. But so much of this is scenes you could easily imagine on stage. Staged like a Greek tragedy, more or less. I think she, and it comes across, I'm so glad she wrote it as a novel rather than as a play, because the narration is so rich, and you wouldn't have had that, I think, in a play, unless you'd had a narrator like Thornton Wilder. Asunción.
No, I was thinking that because she every now and then falls into the colloquial or the dialect, that she must have been very brave, because it was really a transgression of the norm, of the rule.
Absolutely.
Mostly back in the day. I mean, it wouldn't be in this time and age, but and for a black woman.
Perfectly true. She was unacceptable to the conventional world of literature because she wrote in colloquial dialect, which of course now we appreciate as folklore. Some readers in 1937 would have seen it as defective prose, right? On the one hand. On the other hand, the people who spoke this dialect, Richard Wright and others later, said, "You revealed our secrets. You have betrayed us." That's a good point. Wherever she turned, she was unacceptable. The conventional world of New York City, Harlem in the 1930s, there were rules for fiction, and she broke all of them. Not in structure, but in the tone and in the use of dialect.
What about Chandler Harris?
Yes, I mean others, and Mark Twain,
White.
of course.
He was white.
How
Yeah.
about Twain, he was white.
Exactly. No, I'm not saying that nobody else ever did
Flannery
this.
O'Connor.
Absolutely, absolutely. Many people have used dialect, and 19th century Russian, French, English, of course, Thomas Hardy. But in the New York of that day, she, as Asuncion, I think, is saying, she dared to step out doing what a black woman would not normally do.
Fantastic.
I mean, yeah, I mean, it seems, as I said at the beginning, it seems very normal now, but I guess it was very abnormal at that time, and she was very brave to do this. I'll skip. We don't have that much time left. She's a girl here. She hasn't become a woman yet. She was stretched on her back beneath the pear tree. This is one of the first steamy passages. Soaking in the alto chant of the visiting bees, the gold of the sun and the panting breath of the breeze, when the inaudible voice of it all came to her. She saw a dust-bearing bee sink into the sanctum of a bloom. The 1,000 sister calyxes arched to meet the love embrace and the ecstatic shiver of the tree from root to tiniest branch, creaming in every blossom and frothing with delight. I mean, this is, whoa. Now the tree keeps coming back, and it's usually a signal of fertility and freedom and excitement and awakening. But on a couple of occasions, it's where the rumors gather. It's where the negative energies are. So every image has an opposite meaning, potentially. I'll skip stuff. I knew this would happen. She begs her grandmother, please don't make me marry Mr. Killix. Tain't Logan Killix I want you to have, baby. It's protection. I ain't getting old, honey. I'm done old. One morning soon now, the angel with the sword is going to stop by here. The day and the hour is hid from me, but it won't be long. I asked the Lord when you was an infant in my arms to let me stay here till you got grown. He done spared me to see me day. My daily prayer now is to let these golden moments roll on a few days longer till I see you safe in life. I mean, this is beautiful, and you can see how some would see this as a depiction reinforcing a stereotype of an uneducated person, but I think the emotion carried in this is very vivid. As I say, 40 years ago, she ran into headwinds on this after her death. No, wait, she died in 1960, I think. So before her death, she was getting a lot of flack for reinforcing stereotypes. We'll all make our own judgment on that. I'm gonna, I have so many of these. Let me read 3 or 4 more, and then we'll just talk. I'd like to know how many have memories of this book. There are years that ask questions and years that answer. Janie had no chance to know such things, so she had to ask. Did marriage end the cosmic loneliness of the unmated? Did marriage compel love like the sun the day? Skipping a little bit. The house, this is with Killick, I think it was. The house was absent of flavor. But anyhow, Janie went on inside to wait for love to begin. This is she's a child here and doesn't really know what's coming next. The new moon had been up and down 3 times before she got worried in mind. Then she went to see Nanny, her grandmother, in Mrs. Washburn's kitchen on the day for beaten biscuits. She knew that she had not experienced love, but she did not know what love was. She went to check this out with her grandmother. And then when she understands that this is not working at the end, the endings of the chapters, if you just read the endings, they're to die for. I mean, and it includes nature and the Bildungsroman, you know, the German sense of the developing of a person, the developing of a character, and you just see it sometimes in an image reflected in the moon and the pear tree and in the horizon. She knew that God tore down the old world every evening and built a new one by sunup. It was wonderful to see it take form with the sun and emerge from the gray dust of its making. The familiar people and things had failed her, so she hung over the gate and looked up the road towards way off. She knew now that marriage did not make love. Janie's first dream was dead, so she became a woman. Wow. Woof. Can you put this down? I can't remember. And then the next chapter, just very briefly, they sat on the boarding house porch and saw the sun plunge into the same crack in the earth from which the night emerged. Woof. I just, it's really beautiful. Skipping almost all of the things that I wanted to read. Let's go to almost the end. When Jo dies of kidney failure, she screams. I could see her on the stage. The Greek, the tragic woman in Greek tragedy. Come here, people! Jodi's dead. My husband is gone from me. It's a big deal. She's screaming, and she never liked this man, not even a little. But his death is a huge event. Paradoxically, the horrible, horrible death by hydrophobia of her one true love is a much lower. She gets into her jeans. She dresses up for Jodi's funeral. Really gets dressed up. For the death of her final husband in the story, she wears jeans, and there's no shouting. It's Nanny had taken the biggest thing God ever made, the horizon. For no matter how far a person can go, the horizon is still way beyond you. Huh? The Haitian proverb, the horizon is still way beyond you, meaning you can't quite ever catch it. And she pinched it into such a bit of little thing that she could tie it around her granddaughter's neck tight enough to choke her. She hated the old woman who had twisted her so in the name of love. That's Nanny, the grandmother. And what the heck, we're supposed to end at 1. Let's go right to the very last page, because it's the same images, the same power. And it's the shore, it's the horizon. There's been all this commotion. You can think of it as a symphony, or a symphony that has disharmony and dissonance, and then resolves with a harmonious chord at the end. Everything has gone on. She hasn't gotten very far in life. She went from Eatonville to Jacksonville to Eatonville. Nothing much has happened to her materially. She's had 3 husbands. Only one of them was any good, the last one. And he died a horrible, tortured death. And so it ends like this. Janie stirred her strong feet in the pan of water. The tiredness was gone, so she dried them off on the towel. Now that's how everything was, Phoebe. Back to the beginning. We're with Phoebe. Just like I told you. And I'm back home again, and I'm satisfied to be here. I done been to the horizon and back, and now I can sit here in my house and live by comparisons. This house ain't so absent of things like it used to be before tea cake came along. It's full of thoughts, especially that bedroom. I know them sitters and talkers gonna worry their guts into fiddle strings till they find out what we've been talking about. We, Janie and Phoebe. That's all right, Phoebe. Tell them. they're gonna make admiration, because my love didn't work like they love, if they ever had any. Then you must tell 'em love ain't something like a grindstone that's the same thing anywhere and do the same thing to everything you touch. Love is like the sea. It's a moving thing, but still in all, it takes its shape from the shore it meets, and it's different with every shore. Wow. Woo. Again, the simplicity of the structure. The time, I mean, it's a flashback. You know, that's a conventional form. Two false starts and then the real love. That's very conventional. There are no more than 2 or 3 images that are sustained throughout: the pear tree, the horizon, the hair. That's about it. And with that simplicity, you know, in 6 weeks, wow. Clearly she was writing about herself, and what it is to become from a girl to a woman. I'm not an expert on that. I have always loved this book, and I still do. And I rest my case.
Do you know what happened to her lover who was 12 years younger?
No,
Did he die tragically, or-
Great question. I don't know. Does anybody know? Because she did. It is basically her own story, and she was told by friends, "He's going to get your money." Well, she didn't have any money, just like Janie. There wasn't much to defraud her of. We're at the bottom of the social ladder here, and economically, and the striving in the bit of realism here is the characters in this book would not likely have ever become well-to-do. It just wasn't normal, and so that realism is followed pretty loyally. What she was able to do was find love and find freedom in her own way. That could not be prevented by a repressive society or a tyrannical husband. That she was able to do. So very modest from where we're sitting, but very, very heroic from what Hurston lived and what the character lived. Were you going to mention
I have
something?
a question.
Yeah.
And I don't remember if it's even stated how much money Tea Cake brings home after he's taken.
It is stated, I forget, but he takes 200, he squanders half of it on buying drinks for his friends. Then he goes, oh, I have to go back to her now. So he goes gambling, and I think he triples what he's got. He comes back with maybe 300, something like that. So he squanders half of it. He goes to play poker with the 100 and comes back with 300 and a knife wound in his back. Yeah, a really charming guy, Tea Cake. I mean, he's irresistible. I mean, this is somebody I would want to have met. He goes around with his guitar. He's a good poker player. He's a good faker, but an absolutely loyal husband. Absolutely loyal.
There's some things that also ring true with contemporary society, and that is, I think women today are looking at ways to be independent without a husband.
Yes.
And they still want true love, and we want them to have true love. But none of that preoccupies her. It's only in terms of the men and her life.
You know, that's a great point. Adapting this to our current situation, there's so much that's changed.
Yeah.
In her world, her grandmother she said, you will marry this guy, and I was born a slave, and you're going to do better than I did. And the idea of not being married, I guess it wasn't a realistic option.
It makes, I've just been reading a book by Daniel Menouiden. He's a Pakistani writer.
Oh.
In Other Rooms, Other Wonders.
Oh.
And that society that's described in this collection of short stories that do have links to one another, it's about this era. Women don't have a chance, really. And it's I'd recommend
Yeah.
that book to
I think this would
Would
be
a
a
wonderful parent.
this would be a
with these
terrible
children.
time to be alive. The 1930s.
Well,
Ugh. The
terrible
Depression, World War II, the roles of society, the overt racism, oof. I mean, the 30s must have been awful. And again, seeing it, I could never imagine, but just trying to see it from her point of view, so heroic. That's a very good point. I mean, I guess there must have been single women back then. They don't exist in fiction that I know of.
They're very
in-
rare.
in,
Rare as heads, too.
I mean, currently we have lots of material on that, but in the Harlem Renaissance, a single woman as a protagonist, I can't think of any. Can anybody think of one? I guess it wasn't an option. This would be the generation of my parents, by the way, and not being married was not an option. They were married in 1943. They were born in 1913 and 1920, something like that. So maybe 10 years since this, but also New York. They were a mixed marriage. He was from Brooklyn, she was from the Bronx. It was called and the idea of either one of them not marrying was unthinkable. I do remember from my aunts and uncles. I didn't like any of them, but I met them. Everybody got married in the Depression. The need for any source of security. And I remember my parents, 10 years younger than this, saying, the Depression. It really, really traumatized people, and they would grab onto anything they could. So there were some different parts of the equation, I think, that we don't really have to deal with. It was bad, really bad time.
But I think
Senora.
that Thurston was looking for something else altogether. And of course, the society didn't provide the models, the pattern to follow, but she was looking for something else. And I knowing as Haiti as you know, probably that's where she felt more free than anywhere else, and probably that's why
She loved Haiti.
was able to write her book, because probably she identified herself, Haiti is as African as Africa, and probably that's where she found herself really at home with her Africanness and her identity.
That's a powerful point. And she was an anthropologist.
Yeah, that's why.
And she did love Haiti. I don't know all the details of that, but this was her real spiritual home. Yesterday, Gloria Steinem was interviewed, she's 80 now, interviewed by Terry Gross. And Terry Gross, did you hear it? Terry Gross asked her, let's see, because Gloria Steinem is single,
Not anymore. She was married, though.
She was married, but then the husband died or something.
Yeah.
I think the question was, what happened to you when you turned 50? Was she single at the age 50 maybe? I don't know.
Probably.
And Gloria Steinem, yesterday, live, 2015, said, I didn't know what to think. I had no role models when I was 50. I had no role model. That's not very long ago. Wow, Gloria Steinem didn't have role models. You wouldn't think that she would need one, right? She's such an original thinker, and she's so bold and a leader in so many ways. But she lost herself at about 50, she said. And then when she was 60, she found herself again. She found that the transition to 50 was terrible. She didn't know what to do, what to think, where she fit. When she was 60, she was better. I mean, it's worth listening to that interview. It must be on the internet somewhere, I guess. Fascinating. I mean, Gloria Steinem lacked a role model when she was 50? Incredible. So multiply that exponentially for what what Hurston must have been going through. And as you say, maybe she had a little taste of it in Haiti, certainly not in the U.S.
Yeah.
There really wasn't anything to grab onto. Whence her need to write this. She just really needed to. She must have needed to if she did it in 6 weeks. This was an obsessive act. Anybody? When did you read this first? When did you first read this? I read it 20 years ago.
I read it years ago.
Yeah.
And then started reading. I haven't finished it this time. It's wonderful though. She's a good writer.
I mean, you can't. I call it unputdownable. You know, it's an unputdownable book. It's first of all, it's so easy, but there's no waste in it. There's no wasted motion. There's no drivel, no prose. It's just everything of it. It's either extremely sexy or extremely liberating or extremely sad, and the narration is just unsurpassed. I don't know of any fiction that's more vivid than this.
I just read it, but my son, who is now 32, read it in the 10th grade in a very liberal school. And in addition to the sex passage that you read, he absolutely remembered verbatim this line. And then noticed her firm buttocks, like she had grapefruits in her hip pockets. He remembered that.
Read the rest of that sentence. I was going to read that, but I thought I shouldn't.
It goes off with her hair, the great rope of black hair swinging to her waist and unraveling in the wind like a plume. Her pugnacious breast trying to bore holes in her shirt.
That's why.
He remembered that passage, 15, 20 years later?
Yeah, no. I was going to read that today, but I thought maybe I shouldn't. Yeah, I mean,
That's
it's.
the one that struck him.
No, it's. I mean, it's beautifully sexy without being at all vulgar in any way. It's a lovely book, and I guess it is a book that made America. Thank you.
Thank you
Something.
very much.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.